I'll go ahead and get us started with our session today. I wanted to welcome everybody to the Adaptation and Vulnerabilities interest group, member-led interest group. I'm one of the organizers, Jackie Lambiers, and I'm in Arlington, Texas, which is the land of the Wichita people and affiliated tribes. And we're so happy to have you here today. And I would love for each of our participants to introduce themselves in the chat in any way you feel comfortable doing that. And we'll get started with our two speakers that we're lucky to have with us today. We're recording this session, so we can also have it available to our members and participants later on as well, or you can share it with others in that format. Today, we're going to talk about how cities deal with climate resilience and also with some tragedy and challenges related to some of the things that happen around climate change, namely wildfires and flooding. And so we're lucky today to have two people that I've had the pleasure of working with at TCU. One of them is Lindsey Baker. She's currently an assistant city manager in the city of Buda, Texas, which is in central Texas, not that far from Austin. Maybe she can tell us a little bit more precisely where that town is.
We are directly south of Austin, and we are right up against it.
Okay, so you're like a suburb.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so we're happy to have her with us. She's going to talk about an incident, however, that took place when she was an assistant city manager and PIO for the city of South Lake Tahoe in California during the Caldor wildfire there a couple of years ago. And the other person who's with us today is Ryan Hunt. He is also someone that I've had the pleasure of working with at TCU through a graduate certificate program that we have there in the summers. And he's currently working for Cathedral City, California, as their manager of community events and communication. And so we're really excited to hear his story, which is a little bit more recent than Lindsey's, about challenges that were presented with Tropical Storm HIlary and some of the flooding that happened around that event, and also how they responded, especially to vulnerable populations, which of course is the focus of our interest group. How do we do better outreach and think about people and homes and the things we love? So we're going to talk about some of that today through the lenses of what it's like to be working within the city municipal context and how we respond to these events as they happen around us. And we're going to get started really just with an elevator speech about exactly what happened in each of these communities. And we'll start with Lindsey to hear a little bit about what happened in the city of South Lake Tahoe, maybe the number of people who were affected or harmed during that event, the duration of the event, a little bit about that perhaps, and then your role when that unfolded in California.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I always appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this experience. We learned a lot as a city when I was there going through this incident. I think we were unprepared for some of the things that we encountered, and so it's great to be able to share some of those lessons. So the Caldor fire, I'm going to be looking at some notes. I apologize, not always looking at the camera, but the Caldor fire began on August 14th in 2021. It was what's considered west of South Lake Tahoe, kind of in a rural area. We didn't think too much about it, and then it proceeded to burn about 6,500 acres of this rural area. It impacted a number of homes in that area, and we thought, okay, it won't go any further than there. We continue to monitor the situation. Disaster emergency declarations were issued by the governor of California, then by the county. And then as the fire continued to progress, our city manager at the time issued not an emergency declaration, but we activated the EOC anyway to monitor the events on August 21st. So within about a week time frame, we realized the fire was continuing to progress. And when we're talking about this in the frame of climate adaptation and change, we kept being told that under no circumstances a fire going to go past the granite summit that's known as Echo Summit and come into the Tahoe Basin. We thought we were geographically protected from any wildfire coming over that area. Unfortunately, with everything that has changed with our climate, that's no longer the case. And the wildfire continued to progress, and it hit our trigger point, which was along a highway approaching that summit. And that was the point at which we declared the emergency, and then 3 days later, we issued an evacuation order of our community. Tahoe, being what it is a tourism-based economy. So while the population is about 22,000, we can see an upwards of 200,000 people on a given weekend. We were approaching Labor Day weekend, so there was a lot of people coming into town. So we were doing a lot of pre-messaging to tell people, listen, please leave as kindly as we could. We did not use all available methods of communication at the time. That is one thing I would have changed going back. But we evacuated our population because of the pre-messaging that we did. A lot of people left voluntarily. So once we evacuated on August 30th, our law enforcement agencies who came from all throughout the state to assist with that effort managed within a 5-hour period to evacuate the entire town. So, and we have one road going through the town, and that is the only way people were able to leave. And then they had to go over into Nevada. We also had to move our emergency operations center because it was potentially in the line of impact. So there was a lot of logistical issues going on. So that's kind of the overview of what happened. We repopulated about a week later, which is a whole nother discussion in and of itself for another time. My role in that specifically was the public information officer. I had only been in my role for about 3 months. I did not know the community. I did not know the agencies and the main players. Our community had never done like full-scale disaster exercises, so a lot of this was new. Our fire personnel, our law enforcement agencies in the area were amazing. They knew what they were doing, so we were very fortunate to have them. And then, of course, the state resources that came in. But that's generally, again, like the quick and dirty overview, and then my role, and then those impacted, it was the entire population. So those that are able-bodied, those that were not, those that are homeless, absolutely everybody in the community was impacted by that. So having to look at your home for potentially the last time and identify what actually matters to you, your family, your pets, any sort of special things, people were having to leave very quickly. When it came to our more vulnerable populations, working to evacuate them, we just did not, at the time, have the systems in place and ready to go. So when we activated our EOC, we were figuring all of that out. So this is one of my cautionary tales that I always want to share with folks is make sure that you have already coordinated with all of the different agencies. So working with the transit agency and making sure that paratransit vehicles, ADA accessible vehicles are available to you. Make sure that you have an agreement in place with that transit agency for emergency transportation services in these types of incidents so that they are dedicated to picking up those vulnerable individuals and being able to get them out in a timely manner and know where they are. Having the map already created of where all of the senior centers are and where all of the low income hotels or whatever they are, whatever your community has, are wherever the homeless shelters are, have those vulnerable centers identified on a map and ready to go. Coordinate with the homeless coalition or whatever that entity is in your particular community, and the hospitals, because that's a huge vulnerable population, but they also needed transportation assistance. So making sure that you coordinate with all of those different agencies and organizations, having that plan together, and then doing tabletops, and if you have the resources, full-scale exercises with all of those agencies involved to be able to identify what the logistics look like and where the gaps might be before an incident is happening. Because when you experience gaps during the incident, because you didn't know what you were doing, people will get left behind. Our police department worked very closely with the Homeless Coalition. They went out into our meadows and all of the different areas that we have around Tahoe to go find the homeless camps and individuals. Some refused to leave. We could not force them to go. But the majority of them we were able to get out through the assistance of the Homeless Coalition, literally driving around with a van, and our PD and other law enforcement agencies. And then working with the transit agency once they were able to find operators. That was another challenge, is because the operators had evacuated. So we had no bus drivers for the buses that were available. So those kind of really small details make a huge difference if they're not already identified before an incident happens. So I would say those are probably my top, from a logistical standpoint, takeaways and lessons learned. Of course, using all potential communication methods, using a reverse 911 system, so you can target your community geographically, who you're communicating with, but making sure that all of that messaging, people know that are involved in the EOC response, they know when that messaging is going out, and they know what's in that messaging, and everybody agrees. Because once that message goes out, there's no taking it back. And we experienced that where somebody had made a decision to make some changes in the timing, and that negatively impacted the response as well. So just making sure, if you have a public information officer that's involved, making sure that they're always in the room where those decisions are being made. So I think those are, oh, and my final point would be shelter resources. Knowing where people are supposed to go, what the resources are at the various locations. Do they provide medical care? Are pets allowed? You know, is it both men, women? Are all people welcomed there? And again, what resources do they have? Food, ADA accessibility, etc. So having all of those details outlined and those contacts made with the various agencies that would be standing up shelters, it's really important to know what's available. So that's the quick and dirty of the Caldor fire and what we experienced and lessons learned.
Thank you so much, Lindsey, for that overview of what happened. Also, some strategies for reaching vulnerable people, and those partnerships sounded like that was super important. I just added a group on a list of kind of vulnerable people that I'm always trying to think about, and that would be tourists. We know that here in Texas, I don't know when this happened, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was a flood in Wimberley, Texas, and people staying in Airbnb got the whole house washed down the river and killed an entire family. It was just terrible. And they had no idea anything was going on. So that's a tough group to reach.
It is, and I think that's where that reverse 911 system comes into play, because that can be geographically targeted if they have their cell phones, and you can still reach them.
Right. That's terrific. I love the idea of partnering with a local nonprofit in terms of how to reach people who are experiencing homelessness, how to go find them and help them leave if they choose to do that. And glad to hear about those partnerships. Up next is Ryan Hunt and his very recent experience in Southern California.
Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate it. Lindsey, good to see you again too, and appreciate everybody being here. So yeah, Tropical Storm HIlary, I think we're probably still in it, at least in the recovery phase, as we move kind of towards that. But this was, a 50-year storm for the Coachella Valley. We're sandwiched in between Rancho Mirage and Palm Springs, but there's about 8 or 9 Coachella Valley cities that are all within about 30-35 minutes of each other. So we got the short straw, looks like, as far as being kind of the epicenter of the storm system related to damage, and kind of just the extreme nature of the rainfall rates. Having poor irrigation in the desert, it doesn't take much rain to really cause a lot of issues and to create problems, at a pretty rapid rate. So we were dealing with a lot of challenges. We in the advanced stages, kind of leading up, we knew we were starting to get pretty good indication that this was going to be significant. So we started our early communications with just, basic information from the National Weather Service, really starting to get the community to start to, re-engineer their thinking that this is coming, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but, make sure that you're at least prepared on that front. So that really started with coordinating a sandbag operations effort. So our fire department, the admin building, I think we gave away about 65,000 sandbags at that operation. So that was helpful in the days leading up. But as the rain started to arrive in Cathedral City, it was a soft kind of pattern at first. I think allowed people to have a little bit of a false sense of security, and so but it lingered and stayed for the amount of time that it did, about 27 hours of rainfall, up to about 4.6 inches of rain for Cathedral City. And the problem is with the path that it took on. It started at the Whitewater River, so it picked up mud as it was coming because the intense winds that were also a complication. So we got up probably about 50, 60 mile an hour winds, which we've seen here in the desert, but with the increased rainfall and the mud that it's just picking up as it's coming down, the video that I've seen of now, we're starting to see people who are out there tracking the storm from the origin of the Whitewater River and seeing it all kind of cascade down to all of these communities, created mud walls. So that was obviously a huge concern for our community. And I'll get into kind of, where the vulnerable portions of our community were within that. But I also want to give kudos to our police department. As Lindsey mentioned, the homelessness portion of this really, really important to make sure that we have our vulnerable communities covered and make sure that they know if they're in low-lying areas or areas that are susceptible to the rainfall. To Lindsey's point, we also ran into some that did not want to leave, but our police department, we're lucky that in Riverside County, a lot of the communities within the Coachella Valley contract their police and fire. We're fortunate to have them housed within the city, so they're local, which is great. So we have a homeless liaison unit within our police department, and so we partnered with the media to kind of do that ride-along story to showcase that we were going out in the community to make sure we checked on all of our homeless hotspots and where some of those communities would be. So to alert them, we did get some out, which was good, and we are fortunate that with the extreme nature of the storm, we're very lucky that we experienced zero casualties. I think we did have a couple of pets. As a dog lover, those count just the same. I know that's certainly loss of life, but we are certainly thankful that we didn't lose any human life throughout the storm system. But as the mud walls started to kind of grow, and I think they were up to about 5, 6, 7 feet, and that Sunday night into Monday is when we started to kind of target where our vulnerable areas were in the storm system, particularly along the Horizon Road area, which has received a lot of national media attention as well for being kind of the hardest hit. In that neighborhood, there's a senior boarding care facility that had 14 non-ambulatory residents within that facility. So these are folks that can't move for any reason from a mobility standpoint. Some had dementia and other health issues. So it was a real focus early on in that first few days. We had some swift water rescues, but we were really from the potential loss of life and danger and risk scenario targeting that senior boarding care facility. So it took several hours just to get in the home. These were residents that were trapped with underneath, 8 to 10 feet of mud within their home. Really just incredible. And so we knew that this wasn't going to be this was going to be a very unique rescue. And so my role throughout this was essentially public information officer for the city. I've got a webmaster, graphic designer, but I've got a whole new appreciation for one-person shops and storm crisis and response, because you're it. And so, our fire chief called me and he said, "Hey, the media is already here," which is always a fear when you're doing a very tense rescue operation that really didn't have much of a margin for error. And so I ran out there. Of course, they heard it on the scanner. Nobody tipped them off. They just saw the activity. The National Guard was starting to move in. Calo OES. We utilized the California Mutual Aid System. We were very, very well supported by our state agencies, particularly Cal OES. So I don't want to just give kudos to our personnel that was within the Cathedral City departments, but also we leveraged a lot of resources from the county and the state. Being a city of 55,000 people, budget of 69 million, we are limited in our resources. I think we're the leanest staff in the Coachella Valley at about 200 employees. So we had 24 firefighters, and that's our total firefighter base. Not everybody's deployed all at once. So we had about 12 responding to this particular incident. So once I arrived on scene, Lindsey mentioned you always want to be on the same page with messaging. And I went to our fire chief and said, hey, what's going to happen here? Because I need to know, is this going to be a mass casualty event? Because we already have cameras basically recording this rescue operation. And he said, I guarantee you we will get everybody out of here alive and safe. And he looked at me and it was definitive, and I had to go on that. And there was a trust that had already been built. We kind of came into the city at around the same time, so we had a little bit of that camaraderie, but I had trust in him when he said it the way that he did, that he was confident in his crews and the rescue operation. So in order to get through the mud and into the mud, obviously these residents can't walk. So we had to leverage Burtec, which was our recycling and trash services that we contract, to be able to use a what's called an earth mover. And so we use the scoop portion of that. So we would put the firefighters with straps in the scoop, and then we would bring the residents on top, strap them in with the firefighters, and this would go. And then I think we could do 4 at a time. And so this transport operation took probably about 2.5 hours, just to make sure that everybody was safe and it was delicate. And I told Jackie, as we were talking before this webinar, that, these were humanitarians on the ground, not just firefighters at that point. I mean, you have folks that are totally terrified, that are panicked, that, they don't know what's going on. They don't know whether they're going to make it out of here. And, there's this one shot, I was out there, and this one woman had a teddy bear for comfort. And she said, no, my teddy bear. And he took the teddy bear and strapped it in with them together and kind of just held her tight and said, we're going to get through this. And so, that's more than what I think they probably signed up for. I think firefighters and law enforcement and public safety personnel are usually not wanting the spotlight and the credit, but I do have to give them, I think the word hero is tossed about a lot, but they really earned it that day as far as getting them out. So 14 non-ambulatory residents rescued to safety, transported to another location. So I think we performed in total 66 rescue operations throughout the storm. We also did this while our 911 system went down. So that was an interesting challenge and dynamic with all of this. So Palm Springs, us, and I think 2 other cities lost their 911. So we had to divert calls through our business line, which yielded about 1,395 calls, which was, as you can imagine, for a city that size, I think we have 6 dispatchers. That's a lot to take on in one night. So a lot of challenges there. I think, learning, with on the fly with some of this stuff, I was fortunate to have the experience of the winter storm in Texas in 2021 of February that year. And that obviously shut down the entire state, was a very significant, but you're always learning about ways you can retool and be better prepared. I think our emergency operations plan is, if you can't see the dust flying around my office, it needs to be updated. It's a significantly dated document that I think will now go back and hopefully retool and be able to get that all in writing, because I think we operated on a lot of experience and we had people that in place in leadership roles that had done this before. So I think we were in good hands, and I'm proud of the fact that we didn't lose, anybody from a loss of life standpoint, but that's still something that I'd like to go back and make sure that we have a better prepared system in place in writing for the future, because I think those plans and those the process is really important. We're a majority Latino community, heavy retirement based community. We actually are challenged because we have, obviously snowbirds are the term that is utilized, folks that live here part-time when the weather's really nice. And they're now just coming back to some of the storm damage. So that's been a unique challenge because a lot of people weren't local to the incident, which is great for their safety, but then they're coming back home with thousands of dollars of flood damage to their homes. So Governor Newsom has submitted a letter to the president for a federal declaration of disaster. That's where we're really struggling right now is funding. Our budget's $69 million, and we turned in $40 million in damages, public and private property HIlary combined. So you can imagine that this is not going to be a cheap fix. It's going to be a very expensive long-term recovery as we enter that, but we remain hopeful because the homeowners need FEMA assistance, whether that be small interest loans as well. And I think the frustration is starting to boil over a little bit that we haven't gotten that declaration. So we're in a little bit of a waiting mode there. But we did all of our news releases in Spanish, being a majority Latino community. We do have a substantial percentage of that is bilingual, but it's at least a quarter that is Spanish speaking only. So it was important for us to utilize our partnerships with some of the media agencies, Univision, Telemundo. We've got a publication called El Informador, which is the most popular kind of printed publication in the Coachella Valley that's Spanish speaking. And so we were able to get a partnership where they were translating our news releases and publishing them in real time, which was really helpful too. But that's kind of the overall kind of elevator portion of it, Jackie. But I'm sure I missed a lot. But yeah, we're still very much in it.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for that overview. Really, to both of you for talking about things that it's hard to represent them. They're so huge and so overwhelming, really, to think about. We had a question in the chat very quickly about how that reverse 9-1 setup was done. Lindsey, could you talk about that? And then maybe after that question, what we'll do next, and Eliza can help us, is we'll split into 2 breakout rooms, and maybe Ryan can be in one and Lindsey can be in the other, and we can have some smaller conversations and questions. But let's do that one question really quickly, Lindsey.
Yeah, my involvement in that was very limited because it was the county that ended up doing the reverse 911. We had discussed the city doing it, but because there was a larger area besides just the city limits that was going to be impacted, the county preferred to do that. So that is, again, it's a system. I think they I can't remember if they use code red or a different system. But it basically allows them to go in and input a geographical area, and it sends out text messages essentially and alerts to individual cell phones within that geographical location. So you really do have an opportunity to reach people that you otherwise would not be able to because of that. So.
Yeah, it sounds like that also is in the realm of partnership. So knowing who can send those types of messages out and thinking bigger than maybe your own community or your own whatever neighborhoods or sections of areas of regions that you're dealing with, knowing who has access to those and having plans in place so you know immediately who to call it. I know that sounds like essential. Eliza, can you please help us get into 2 breakout rooms? I want to invite our participants. We're going to spend about 15 minutes in these breakout rooms, and then we'll come back for some kind of a little bit more debrief or wrap up, and then just a couple of quick announcements at the end of our meeting. But let's have some smaller conversations for about 15 minutes.
Together, and then you get through that, and then you get back into your day-to-day life, and then you kind of forget about that, but you didn't deal with the stress, and then it starts coming out. And so that's what our community experienced for sure. And so making sure that you talk about that and identify mental health resources that you can, whether it's you providing it or sharing different resources, especially governmental resources that folks can go to if you're a municipality, for people to seek help and assistance. Because if you don't deal with it, it's going to come out in different ways and really harm you and your family and those around you. So.
No, thank you so much for talking about, what happens after the event and that there are still going to be vulnerabilities in the community. That's one of the things we talked about in our session. Ryan, do you have anything you want to share from your smaller session with the larger group before we?
Yeah, no, it was a really great dialogue, great conversation. I think, we're still get some really good questions about mitigation and kind of where we're at with that. I think that's the process now that as we move forward, what can we do from a retention standpoint related to flooding? Are there federal projects that we can really start, ratcheting up the leverage for now with some of our work that's being done in Sacramento and in Washington? So I think, it's going to be interesting to see, day David had a really good question that I got cut off right at the buzzer when we were kind of moving. So hopefully, David, I gave you a little bit of a closure on that answer there. But we're still learning a lot about our infrastructure and kind of what's going to be needed. But I think, it's also been, it's not the time to tell this story, but I think, as I mentioned to the group, we had a bridge that was built on Cathedral Canyon, which was one of our main thoroughfares, that had that not been in place before this storm, I think all three of our main thoroughfares would have just kind of blended together and the roads would have just completely been destroyed. And so Indian Canyon and Palm Springs is looking at a 2 to 3 month closure. If you are to be able to go over there and see what it looks like, it's just a complete mess of cracked concrete and just really just totally a devastated area. So we're not alone in Cathedral City. The price tag, like I said, is approaching $200 million for Riverside County, but it's going to be very interesting to see now as we enter the mitigation phase, maybe some updates that I'll have a chance to talk to the group about what this looks like after we've really kind of seen where our weaknesses are from an infrastructure standpoint.
Thank you, Ryan, for sharing that. I really appreciate Lindsey and Ryan for being with us. They're kind of my friends, but also just great work colleagues. I've enjoyed working with them. I met Lindsey back in 2013, I think, and Ryan more recently than that. And Ryan used to work in my hometown here in Texas, so I got to know him well and just appreciate you all being here very much. I wanted to recognize the other organizers of this group who are in the room with us. One is Nicole Kane, Sylvia Chang, and David Savarese. So we're super happy to work with all of you and that you were able to be with us today. Just a couple of quick announcements. We're looking for people who have GIS experience and story mapping, and I made myself vulnerable in my little room and talked about how I don't really understand why that's so important, but as a communication person, but it is important to many people in ASAP apparently, and especially in this interest group. So we're looking for people who might be interested in helping us with story mapping and GIS. If you've got those skills, please reach out to one of us. I think especially Sylvia Chang and David, probably Savarese, are the ones who might know the most about it. Maybe Nicole does too. I just know I don't. And then we also kind of tentatively have set for our October meeting, talking about the building of this knowledge network that we had some meetings about more recently. And so we're going to continue that conversation, and we'll send you more information about exactly what that is. But again, please help me with a virtual clap for our speakers today. Really appreciate you guys being with us. Thanks again, Ryan and Lindsey. And thanks to all of you for the great conversation and questions. Appreciate you, and just have a good